a charity foundation director was caught on recording explaining how she planned to redirect children's treatment funds toward a branding initiative that would make the foundation famous in philanthropic circles. The elderly hospital volunteer who discovered the budget discrepancies was threatened with termination and told her 30-year legacy would be erased if she breathed a single word to anyone. She did not fight back. She did not defend herself. She simply continued reading stories to dying children in the cancer ward, waiting for the truth to destroy everything she had built. But there was a man sitting quietly in the hospital corridor that day, wearing a faded jacket and a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, who had heard every single word. And when he finally stood up and walked toward the conference room door, the director realized she had just ended her career in front of the anonymous donor, whose signature appeared on every major check that kept that foundation alive. The Sunrise Children's Foundation had been providing hope to sick children and their families for nearly 4 decades. What had started as a small community effort by grieving parents who had lost their own daughter to leukemia had grown into one of the most respected pediatric charities in Southern California. Their mission statement, unchanged since 1983, was carved into a marble plaque that hung in the lobby of their downtown headquarters. To ensure that no family facing childhood illness ever feels alone, and no child is ever denied treatment due to financial hardship. For 39 years, that mission had guided every decision, every dollar raised, every family helped, every child comforted. The foundation operated primarily through individual donations, corporate grants, and an annual fundraising gala that had become a cornerstone event in the Los Angeles philanthropic calendar. Over the decades, thousands of families had received assistance. Medical bills totaling tens of millions of dollars had been covered. Housing had been provided for parents who needed to relocate near specialized treatment centers. Counseling services had supported families through the impossible emotional burden of watching their children fight for survival. The foundation's reputation was impeccable. Their financial transparency was exemplary. Their outcomes were documented and verified. And their commitment to the children they served was absolute, or at least it had been. For the past 12 years, the foundation had received substantial anonymous donations from a benefactor who wished to remain completely unknown. The contributions arrived quarterly through a carefully structured trust, always for significant amounts, always accompanied by the same simple, handwritten note. For the children. Nothing more. No name, no return address. No request for recognition or acknowledgement. Just those 3 words and a signature that bank officials had verified belonged to a legitimate account holder whose identity was protected by multiple layers of legal privacy. The foundation's board of directors had speculated endlessly about their mysterious guardian angel. Some suspected a Silicon Valley billionaire with a personal connection to childhood illness. Others imagined a grieving parent who had lost their own child and wanted to spare others the same devastation. A few wondered if it might be a group of anonymous donors who had pooled their resources for maximum charitable impact. None of them knew the truth. Keanu Reeves had been that anonymous donor since losing someone precious to him many years before. The grief had never fully healed, perhaps never would, but he had channeled it into something meaningful. Something that honored memory through action. Something that transformed private pain into public good without requiring public recognition. He never visited the foundation's headquarters, never attended their galas, never sought acknowledgement or gratitude. The giving itself was sufficient, knowing that somewhere in Los Angeles, children were receiving treatment because of his contributions, families were finding hope because of his support, young lives were being saved because of his commitment. That knowledge brought him a peace that no public acknowledgement could ever match. But recently, something had begun to trouble him deeply. His accountant, a meticulous man named Richard who managed the charitable, giving through carefully constructed trusts designed to protect donor anonymity, had flagged concerning patterns in the foundation's publicly filed financial documents. The numbers no longer added up the way they should. Program expenses had decreased despite the foundation's stated expansion of services. Administrative costs had climbed steadily higher each quarter, and substantial sums were being allocated to categories vaguely labeled as strategic visibility initiatives, and donor cultivation programs, and brand development investments. Richard had presented his findings during a routine quarterly review, spreading documents across Keanu's kitchen table with the careful precision of someone delivering unwelcome news. The trends are undeniable, Richard had explained. 3 years ago, this foundation spent approximately 78 cents of every dollar on direct services to families. Today, that number has dropped to roughly 51 cents. Meanwhile, marketing expenditures have increased from 6% to 22% of the total budget. Where is the money going? Glass. Advertising campaigns, celebrity endorsements, social media initiatives, professional photography and videography, event production, public relations consultants. Richard paused. All legitimate expenses, technically speaking, all documented properly in their tax filings. But the cumulative effect is unmistakable. Resources are being redirected away from helping sick children and toward building organizational visibility. Keanu had studied the documents in silence for a long time. He understood the argument for nonprofit marketing. He understood that organizations needed visibility to attract donors and volunteers. He understood that the philanthropic landscape had changed dramatically in the age of social media, with competition for charitable dollars fiercer than ever. But something felt deeply wrong about watching children's treatment funds become content creation budgets. "I need to see this for myself," he had finally said. "I need to understand what is actually happening inside that organization." Richard had nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that. So I took the liberty of researching their hospital partnerships. The foundation provides substantial support to Los Angeles Children's Hospital, particularly their pediatric oncology program. If you wanted to observe their work in practice, that would be the place to start." That conversation had taken place 3 weeks ago. Now Keanu was here. He arrived at Los Angeles Children's Hospital on a gray Tuesday morning in early November, dressed in his most inconspicuous clothes. Faded blue jeans worn soft from years of use. A plain gray hoodie beneath an old denim jacket with a small tear near the left pocket. Dusty brown boots that had logged thousands of miles on motorcycle trips across the country. And most importantly, a worn black baseball cap pulled low over his famous features, casting shadows that made recognition nearly impossible. His long dark brown hair hung past his shoulders, slightly disheveled from the morning breeze. 3 days of stubble darkened his jaw. He carried himself with the quiet wariness of someone who had spent too many nights in uncomfortable hospital chairs, which was precisely the impression he wanted to create. He looked like any other visitor. A tired uncle, perhaps. A worried family friend. Someone with a sick relative and too much time spent in institutional corridors. Certainly not someone whose signature appeared on checks totaling millions of dollars. The hospital's pediatric oncology wing occupied most of the 4th floor, accessible through a labyrinth of corridors decorated with cheerful murals that seemed almost heartbreakingly optimistic given the gravity of what happened behind these doors. Cartoon animals smiled from the walls. Rainbow paths led toward treatment rooms. Inspirational messages promised that every child was a superhero fighting their own battle. Keanu walked slowly through the corridors, absorbing every detail. The antiseptic smell that could never quite mask the underlying scent of illness. The soft beeping of monitors drifting through partially open doorways. The hushed conversations between parents and doctors that carried the weight of life and death in every carefully chosen word. He observed the medical staff moving with practiced efficiency, always finding time for a gentle word or reassuring touch despite the crushing demands of their work. He watched parents navigating the impossible emotional terrain of hope and fear, clinging to each other in quiet corners where they thought no one could see their tears. He noted the small kindnesses that made impossible situations slightly more bearable. A nurse remembering a child's favorite color. A doctor sitting down to explain test results at eye level. A volunteer bringing fresh coffee to exhausted parents who had forgotten to eat. The foundation's presence was visible everywhere. A playroom filled with toys and games that bore small plaques acknowledging charitable donations. A family resource center offering counseling, meal assistance, and practical support. comfortable waiting areas with amenities that transformed sterile hospital spaces into something approaching warmth. Signs acknowledging the Sunrise Children's Foundation's partnership appeared throughout the wing, reminding everyone that help was available for families facing financial hardship. Good work was being done here. That was undeniable. The question was whether that work could be even better if resources were being allocated differently. Keanu found an empty chair in a corridor outside the family waiting area, positioned where he could observe the comings and goings of staff, volunteers, and administrators without drawing attention to himself. He carried a battered paperback novel that served as both reading material and convenient cover for surveillance. When people glanced his way, they saw a tired visitor passing time with a book. They did not see someone cataloging every interaction and filing away details for later analysis. He had been observing for approximately 90 minutes when he first noticed the elderly woman with the canvas bag of children's books. She emerged from a patient room near the end of the corridor, moving slowly but with evident purpose. Her silver-white hair was pulled back in a neat braid that hung nearly to her waist. Her weathered face bore the marks of 7 decades lived fully, lines that spoke of laughter and tears, and the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent caring for others. She wore a volunteer badge on a blue lanyard around her neck, and her canvas bag was stuffed with colorful books whose well-worn spine suggested they had been read hundreds of times to hundreds of children. Despite her age, there was something remarkably vibrant about her presence, an energy that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than physical vitality, a warmth that preceded her into rooms and lingered after she left. Keanu watched as she moved from room to room along the oncology corridor. She spent real time with each child, not the brief perfunctory visits of someone fulfilling an obligation, but the genuine engagement of someone who cared deeply about each young patient as an individual. She read stories with animated voices that made children laugh despite their circumstances. She held hands with parents who needed human contact more than words. She remembered names and preferences and family situations without consulting notes or records. The children adored her. That was evident from the way their faces transformed when she appeared in their doorways. Even the sickest patients, those connected to multiple monitors and IV lines, managed smiles when she settled into the chair beside their beds. Parents embraced her with the desperate gratitude of people who had found an anchor in a storm. Medical staff greeted her with the easy familiarity of longtime colleagues. Whatever else was happening at this foundation, Keanu realized this woman represented something precious, something authentic, something that no marketing budget could manufacture or replicate. He made a mental note to learn her name and her story. Around 11:30 in the morning, a commotion near the elevator bank announced the arrival of someone important. Keanu lowered his book and watched as a group emerged from the opening doors and began walking toward the oncology wing. At the center of the group walked a woman in her early 40s, professionally dressed in a tailored navy blazer over a cream-colored blouse and matching navy slacks. Her blonde hair was styled with careful precision, her makeup subtle but flawless, her posture radiating the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered. Christine Palmer, Executive Director of the Sunrise Children's Foundation. Keanu recognized her from the photographs on the Foundation's website, though she appeared somewhat more polished in person than in her official headshot. She walked with the purposeful stride of someone with a schedule to maintain, checking her phone between steps, issuing instructions to the assistants trailing in her wake. Her entourage included 3 staff members carrying tablets and folders, plus a young man with professional photography equipment and another with a smartphone mounted on a stabilizer. They moved as a coordinated unit, clearly experienced in the logistics of capturing content while navigating institutional environments. The group paused outside the oncology wing's main entrance to confer. Christine reviewed notes on her phone while assistants discussed optimal lighting conditions and shot compositions. The photographer adjusted his equipment. The social media specialist rehearsed the angles he planned to capture. Keanu edged closer, settling into a seat near enough to observe without appearing to watch. "We have 45 minutes before the donor call," Christine was saying to her team. I want coverage of at least 4 patient interactions. Focus on the younger children. They photograph better. And make sure we get the new playroom signage in frame. The corporate sponsors need to see their logo placement. Should we coordinate with volunteer services about which rooms are prepared? One assistant asked. Already handled. They identified the best candidates this morning. Cooperative families, photogenic patients, nothing too graphic or distressing. We need content that inspires donations, not content that makes people uncomfortable. Keanu felt his stomach tighten. He understood the pragmatic necessities of nonprofit marketing. He understood that organizations needed compelling visuals to attract support. But hearing sick children discussed as content candidates and evaluated for their photogenic qualities landed differently than abstract strategic discussions. The group entered the oncology wing, and Keanu followed at a discreet distance. Over the next 40 minutes, he witnessed a masterclass in manufactured compassion. Christine moved through the wing like a seasoned performer, hitting her marks with practiced precision. At each pre-selected room, she transformed into the image of a caring nonprofit leader. Her smile became warm. Her voice softened with apparent emotion. Her body language communicated deep investment in each child's well-being. She held hands with young patients. She hugged tearful parents. She spoke earnestly about the Foundation's commitment to supporting families through their darkest hours. Every word was pitch perfect. Every gesture was precisely calibrated, and cameras captured all of it. The photographer circled constantly, capturing Christine from flattering angles. The social media specialist recorded video on his smartphone, occasionally directing Christine to repeat gestures or expressions that had not been adequately documented the first time. Assistants managed lighting and positioning, ensuring that each frame would look professional and emotionally compelling when shared across the Foundation's digital platforms. Between rooms, the performance dropped completely. Christine wiped her hands with sanitizer, not with the careful hygiene of someone conscious of immune-compromised patients, but with the barely concealed distaste of someone who found human contact unpleasant. She complained to assistants about room temperatures and hospital smells. She checked engagement metrics on her phone and adjusted her approach based on what content performed best. She discussed the families she had just visited in terms that reduced them to data points in a marketing strategy. The disconnect between her public persona and private demeanor was stark and deeply troubling. And then she encountered Dorothy. The elderly volunteer had been reading to a young patient named Michael when Christine's entourage swept into the room. Michael was 7 years old, bald from chemotherapy, thin and pale, but with remarkably bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. He had been giggling at something Dorothy was reading, a chapter from a book about dragons and knights and impossible adventures, when the visitors arrived. His laughter died immediately. Christine positioned herself beside Michael's bed without acknowledging Dorothy's presence. She began the now familiar routine, the warm smile, the gentle voice, the compassionate questions designed to generate shareable content. The photographer circled. The videographer recorded. Assistants adjusted lighting and prompted Christine with talking points. Dorothy tried to quietly excuse herself, rising from her chair and gathering her books to give the visitors space. But Michael reached for her hand with surprising strength for such a sick child. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay, Miss Dorothy." Christine's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. Annoyance crossed her features so quickly that only someone watching very carefully would have noticed. "The volunteer can wait outside," Christine said smoothly, addressing her comment to the assistants rather than Dorothy herself. "We need to adjust the shot composition." Dorothy hesitated, looking at Michael's pleading eyes, then at Christine's dismissive posture, then back at the child who clearly needed her presence. "I will be right outside," Dorothy told Michael gently, squeezing his hand. "I will finish our story as soon as your visitors are done." Michael's face crumpled with disappointment, but he nodded bravely. Dorothy gathered her canvas bag and stepped into the corridor, her weathered face carefully composed despite the obvious hurt in her eyes. The photo session continued for another 10 minutes. Christine posed with Michael, held his hand, pretended to examine his artwork, made expressions of concern and encouragement that would photograph beautifully. When the cameras stopped, she straightened immediately, offered a quick professional goodbye, and moved toward the door where her team waited. As she passed Dorothy in the corridor, Christine paused just long enough to speak quietly, her voice carrying only far enough for the elderly volunteer to hear. "I need to speak with you about volunteer protocols. My office, Thursday morning at 9. Do not be late." Dorothy's face went pale, but she nodded silently. Christine swept away with her entourage, already discussing the next content opportunity. Behind her, Dorothy stood frozen in the corridor, clutching her canvas bag like a shield, her expression that of someone who had just received devastating news. Keanu watched all of it from his position 30 feet away. He continued observing for the next several hours, following Dorothy at a discreet distance, cataloging her interactions with patients and families, building a picture of someone whose entire life seemed dedicated to comforting sick children and their desperate parents. He learned her name from a passing nurse who greeted her warmly. Dorothy Mitchell. He learned from overheard conversations that she had been volunteering at this hospital for 3 decades, since before the current building was constructed, since before most of the current staff were born. He learned that she arrived early and stayed late, that she knew every permanent patient by name and history, that she remembered birthdays and favorite colors and the names of siblings and pets. He learned that she was beloved. Parents sought her out for comfort. Nurses consulted her about patient moods. Doctors trusted her observations about subtle changes in young patients that medical instruments could not detect. She had become an unofficial member of the care team, someone whose presence improved outcomes in ways that could not be quantified, but were universally acknowledged. Around 3 in the afternoon, Keanu found an opportunity to approach her directly. Dorothy had settled into a quiet corner of the family waiting area with a cup of tea she was not drinking. Her canvas bag sat on the chair beside her, colorful book spines visible through worn fabric. Her eyes were distant, her weathered face showing the strain of whatever Christine had communicated in that brief corridor exchange. Keanu approached slowly, his manner casual and unthreatening. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Is this seat taken?" Dorothy looked up, her face automatically rearranging into the welcoming expression she showed to everyone who crossed her path. "Of course not, dear. Please, sit down." Keanu settled into the chair across from her, studying her face for a moment before speaking. "I noticed you earlier. In the oncology wing, reading to the children." Dorothy's smile became more genuine. "Michael, he is one of my special ones. 7 years old and braver than most adults I have met. He has been fighting leukemia for almost a year now, and he never complains. Never asks why this is happening to him. He just wants to hear stories about heroes who overcome impossible odds. You seem to have been doing this for a long time. 30 years next February." Dorothy's eyes grew distant with memory. "My husband Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 32 years ago. He spent his last 7 months in this hospital. Not this building, the old one that was torn down in 1998, but the same institution. The same mission. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you, dear. It was a long time ago, but some losses stay fresh no matter how many years pass." Dorothy sipped her cold tea without seeming to notice the temperature. "When Thomas was sick, there were volunteers who came to visit us. People who had no obligation to care about 2 strangers going through the worst experience of their lives. They sat with us. They talked with us. They reminded us that we were still human beings, not just a medical case to be processed and filed away. They made a difference. They saved me. I am not exaggerating when I say that. Those volunteers kept me sane during the darkest months of my life. They gave me strength to be strong for Thomas when he needed me most." Dorothy's eyes glistened with tears she did not shed. "After he passed, I did not know what to do with myself. We never had children of our own. Thomas's illness made that impossible early in our marriage. But I had all this love, all this capacity for caring, and nowhere to put it. So I came back here. I started reading to children who were going through what my Thomas went through, and I have been doing it ever since. 30 years of service. That is extraordinary. It is not service, dear. It is survival. Every child I comfort, every parent I support, every story I read, it keeps Thomas's memory alive. It gives meaning to the loss. It transforms the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that helps others." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Keanu leaned forward slightly. I could not help noticing earlier. When the foundation director came through, something happened that seemed to upset you. Dorothy's expression shifted subtly. The warmth remained, but something guarded entered her eyes. I should not discuss organizational matters with strangers. Of course not. I apologize for prying. Keanu paused deliberately. It is just that I have some connection to this foundation myself. A personal stake in understanding how they operate, and I have noticed that things seem different lately. Different from what I expected based on their public reputation. Dorothy studied him with new intensity. Her pale blue eyes, weathered but sharp, seemed to look past his disguise to something beneath. Who are you? Really? Keanu considered his response carefully. He could maintain his anonymity. He could deflect and disengage. He could protect himself from the complications that came with revelation. But he had watched this woman spend 3 hours bringing joy to dying children without expecting anything in return. He had seen her accept dismissal and disrespect from Christine Palmer with quiet dignity. He had observed the kind of selfless dedication that deserved honesty in return. My name is Keanu Reeves. For the past 12 years, I have been the anonymous donor who provides major quarterly funding to this foundation. I came here because I have concerns about how my contributions are being used, and I wanted to see the reality behind the public image. Dorothy's eyes widened with recognition. The anonymous donor. The big quarterly checks. That is you, Les. And you have been sitting here for hours, watching, observing, pretending to be just another visitor. I needed to understand what was really happening before I could decide what to do about it. Dorothy was silent for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was low and urgent. Then you need to hear something. Something I have been afraid to tell anyone because I did not know who would believe me or who would protect me if I spoke up. Tell me everything. Over the next 2 hours, Dorothy shared what she had observed during Christine Palmer's 3 years as executive director. She began with the structural changes that had occurred when Christine replaced the foundation's longtime leader, a woman named Barbara Chen who had served for 18 years before retiring due to health issues. Barbara understood what this foundation was supposed to be. Dorothy explained. She had lost her own daughter to cancer before she took the position. She never forgot that every family we serve is someone's world. Every child is someone's everything. She kept the organization focused on the mission, not on metrics or visibility or brand building. And Christine is different. Christine came from the corporate world. She had experience in marketing and strategic communications. The board hired her because they believed the foundation needed to modernize, to compete with newer organizations that were capturing donor attention through sophisticated digital campaigns. What happened when she took over? At first, the changes seemed positive. She updated the website. She expanded the social media presence. She brought in professional photographers and videographers to document the foundation's work. Donations increased in her first year, and the board was pleased. Dorothy's expression darkened. But then the priorities started shifting. Christine became obsessed with growth metrics, with follower counts, with engagement rates and media impressions. She talked about building a brand that would make the foundation famous nationally, that would attract celebrity endorsements and corporate partnerships worth millions of dollars. And the program spending. That is where the problems became impossible to ignore. Dorothy reached into her canvas bag and withdrew a worn notebook. I started keeping records about 18 months ago, when I first noticed that families who would have been approved for assistance 3 years ago were suddenly being turned away. She opened the notebook to a page filled with careful handwriting. The Martinez family. Their son Diego was diagnosed with brain cancer at age 4. They applied for assistance with housing costs because they had to relocate from Bakersfield to be near his treatment facility. 3 years ago, that application would have been approved automatically. Under Christine's new eligibility criteria, they were denied because their combined household income exceeded the revised threshold by $200 per month. She turned to another page. The Johnson family. Twin daughters with the same genetic kidney disease. They needed specialized treatment only available at 3 hospitals in the country. The parents had to choose which daughter would receive treatment first because they could not afford to relocate the whole family for both simultaneously. The foundation could have helped them stay together. Instead, they were told funds were not available. A page after page revealed similar stories. Families who had needed help, applications that had been denied, children who had suffered because resources had been redirected from program spending to marketing initiatives. How many families? Keanu asked quietly. I have documented 47 cases in the past 18 months where families were denied assistance that would have been approved under previous policies. 47 families who came to this foundation believing they would find help and were turned away. And what happened to the money that would have helped them? It went to galas, to promotional videos, to celebrity appearance fees and influencer partnerships and professional photography sessions. Dorothy's voice cracked slightly. Last year, the foundation spent $280,000 on the annual fundraising gala, gourmet catering, celebrity entertainment, professional event production. Meanwhile, the family assistance budget was cut by almost 40%. Keanu absorbed this information in silence. The picture Dorothy was painting was not one of deliberate corruption or personal greed. It was something potentially more insidious, a well-intentioned leader who had become so convinced of her strategic vision that she could no longer see the immediate human cost of her decisions. You said Christine wanted to speak with you Thursday morning about volunteer protocols. Dorothy nodded, her face showing the strain of the past few hours. She has been building a case against me for months, documenting what she calls performance issues, tardiness that I can prove never occurred, protocol violations that she invented after the fact, complaints from families that I know were fabricated because I spoke with those families myself. She is manufacturing grounds for your termination. She wants me gone because I ask questions, because I remember what this foundation used to be, because I represent the old way of doing things that she considers obstacle to her vision of modernization. Dorothy's voice strengthened, and because I have been quietly documenting everything she does not want the board to know. She held up the notebook. This is my record. 18 months of observations, families denied assistance, budget allocations that prioritize image over impact, the gap between what Christine tells the board and what actually happens on the ground. Dorothy met Keanu's eyes directly. I did not know what to do with this information. I did not know who would believe a 70-year-old volunteer over a polished professional executive. But I knew that someday, someone would want the truth, so I kept writing it down, day after day, page after page, hoping that eventually it would matter. Keanu reached out and gently took the notebook from her hands. It matters now, Dorothy, and you will not have to fight this battle alone. The next 3 weeks were a blur of investigation, documentation, and careful preparation. Keanu's forensic accountants conducted comprehensive analysis of the Foundation's publicly available financial filings, comparing them to industry benchmarks and similar organizations. They documented every significant allocation shift, every budget category that had expanded or contracted, every deviation from the Foundation's historical spending patterns. His attorneys prepared formal correspondence requesting an independent operational audit, citing his status as a major donor and expressing concern about alignment between organizational practices and charitable mission. The letters were crafted to be respectful but firm, establishing legal grounds for intervention while avoiding inflammatory accusations. His private investigators, discreet professionals who specialized in nonprofit governance issues, conducted background research on Christine Palmer's career history, identifying patterns that suggested this was not her first organization where marketing priorities had gradually eclipsed mission focus. And through it all, Dorothy continued her work at the hospital, reading to children, comforting families, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while secretly coordinating with Keanu's team to fill gaps in the documentary record. She attended her Thursday meeting with Christine as scheduled. The encounter lasted 45 minutes and unfolded exactly as Dorothy had predicted. Christine presented a file of fabricated performance issues, documented complaints that investigation proved had been manufactured, and a formal performance improvement plan that was clearly designed to create justification for termination. Dorothy had signed the document without protest. Knowing that resistance would only accelerate the timeline, she needed to remain in position long enough for Keanu's intervention to take effect. "I understand, Ms. Palmer," she had said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation of the encounter. "I will make every effort to meet your expectations." Christine had smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed she had eliminated a threat. "I am glad we understand each other, Dorothy. This foundation is evolving, and we need team members who can evolve with us. I hope you will demonstrate that capability in the coming weeks." What Christine did not know was that the entire conversation had been recorded. California law required consent from all parties before recording conversations, and Dorothy had provided her consent in advance to Keanu's legal team. But Christine, by initiating a conversation in her own office about personnel matters, had implicitly consented to documentation under the Foundation's own employee handbook, which specified that performance discussions could be recorded for human resources purposes. The recording captured Christine describing fabricated complaints. It captured her threatening Dorothy's position based on manufactured evidence, and it captured her revealing her true priorities in an unguarded moment near the end of the meeting. "Between us, Dorothy, this foundation does not need your kind of volunteer anymore. We need brand ambassadors who understand social media engagement. We need photogenic representatives who can generate compelling content. We need people who support the strategic vision rather than clinging to outdated approaches that no longer serve our growth objectives." "And the children?" Dorothy had asked quietly. "The children are the product we are selling, Dorothy. The more effectively we market their stories, the more money we raise, and the more children we can eventually help. That is the math. That is the strategy." I would have thought someone with 30 years of experience would understand basic nonprofit economics. That recording would prove devastating when the time came to present evidence to the board. On a Wednesday afternoon in early December, the Foundation's board of directors convened for what had been scheduled as a routine quarterly meeting. The agenda included standard items like financial reports, program updates, and strategic planning discussions. But there was one additional item that had been added at the last minute: a formal request from a major donor to address the board directly regarding concerns about organizational direction. Board Chair William Harrison had approved the request with some reluctance. He had served on the Foundation's board for 12 years and considered Christine Palmer one of the most capable executives he had ever worked with. Her metrics were impressive. Her fundraising results were undeniable. Her strategic vision was exactly what he believed the organization needed to remain competitive in a changing philanthropic landscape. But the donor making the request was not someone whose concerns could be easily dismissed. When Keanu Reeves walked into the conference room that Wednesday afternoon, the atmosphere shifted immediately. He had dressed appropriately for the occasion, wearing a simple dark blazer over a white shirt with no tie, dark jeans, and clean boots. His long dark hair was neatly pulled back. His beard was trimmed. He looked professional but unpretentious, serious but not threatening. Every board member recognized him immediately. "Mr. Reeves," Harrison managed after a moment of stunned silence, "we had no idea you were the donor requesting this meeting. I prefer anonymity in my charitable giving." Keanu replied, taking a seat at the conference table across from Christine Palmer, whose face had gone completely pale. "But circumstances have made direct engagement necessary." Christine recovered her composure with visible effort. "This is quite a surprise. If we had known one of our major supporters was interested in organizational matters, we certainly would have arranged a more appropriate forum for discussion. This forum is entirely appropriate." Keanu's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "I have concerns that need to be addressed by the full board, with complete transparency and formal documentation." Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps you could share those concerns with us, Mr. Reeves. We are certainly committed to addressing any issues our donors might have." Keanu opened a leather folder he had brought with him, withdrawing a stack of documents that he distributed around the table. What you are looking at is a comprehensive analysis of this foundation's financial practices over the past 3 years. The analysis was conducted by independent forensic accountants with no prior relationship to the organization. It compares your spending allocations to industry benchmarks and to your own historical patterns. Board members began flipping through the documents, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they absorbed the data. The key findings are summarized on page 3. 3 years ago, this foundation spent 78% of total revenue on direct program services to families. Today, that number has dropped to 51%. Meanwhile, marketing and communications spending has increased from 6% to 22% of the budget. Fundraising costs have nearly tripled, and administrative overhead has increased by 47%. These numbers require context. Christine interjected smoothly. When I assumed leadership, this foundation was facing a critical challenge. Our traditional donor base was aging out of active giving. Younger philanthropists were supporting newer organizations with more sophisticated digital presences. Without significant investment in visibility and brand development, we were at risk of irrelevance within a decade. I am aware of your strategic rationale, Keanu replied. What concerns me is the human cost of that strategy. He turned to another section of his folder. On page 7, you will find documentation of 47 families who applied for assistance during the past 18 months and were denied under revised eligibility criteria. These are families who would have qualified under previous policies. Families who came to this foundation believing they would find help and were turned away because resources had been redirected to marketing initiatives. A board member named Patricia Hoffman, who had served on the foundation since its earliest years, spoke up. Are these denials documented? Do we have records of the applications and the reasons for rejection? The foundation's records will confirm the denials. What I am providing is additional context about the families affected, medical situations, financial circumstances, the gap between what they needed and what they received. He described several cases in detail. The Martinez family and their son Diego, the Johnson twins with their kidney disease, a single mother named Rebecca whose daughter was fighting bone cancer while Rebecca worked 3 jobs to keep their insurance active, an elderly grandfather raising his orphaned grandchildren after a car accident killed both parents, suddenly facing medical bills he could not comprehend let alone pay. Story after story, family after family, child after child. The board members listened in growing discomfort as the human impact of budget decisions became impossible to ignore. Mr. Reeves, Christine said, her voice tightening with barely controlled anger, I appreciate your passion for the families we serve, but you are presenting a fundamentally misleading picture of our strategic position. The marketing investments I have made are designed to generate returns that will dramatically expand our capacity to help families within the next few years. Short-term sacrifices are necessary for long-term growth. How long must families sacrifice while you build your brand? That is an unfair characterization of responsible organizational development. Is it? Keanu turned to the board chair. Mr. Harrison, I am formally requesting that this board commission an independent operational audit of the foundation's practices. Not a standard financial audit, which would merely verify that numbers are accurately recorded. A comprehensive evaluation of program effectiveness, resource allocation decisions, and alignment between stated mission and actual outcomes. That seems like a significant undertaking, Harrison said cautiously. We have standard audit procedures that have served us well for decades. Standard procedures did not reveal that your program spending had declined by nearly 30% while your marketing budget quadrupled. Standard procedures did not capture the human stories of families denied assistance. Standard procedures are insufficient for understanding whether this organization is actually fulfilling its charitable mission. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours. Christine defended her strategic vision with considerable skill, presenting data and projections and market research that supported her approach to nonprofit modernization. She was articulate, prepared, and genuinely passionate about her belief that the foundation needed to evolve or risk extinction. Keanu countered with evidence and testimonials and the simple moral arithmetic of children who needed help now versus theoretical families who might be helped later. He was calm, methodical, and relentless in his focus on mission primacy over marketing metrics. Board members asked questions of both parties, probing arguments and seeking clarification on specific points. Some clearly sympathized with Christine's modernization efforts. Others were visibly troubled by the magnitude of the shift in spending priorities. Several remained silent, their positions unclear. Finally, Harrison called for a decision. The question before us is whether to commission an independent operational audit as requested by Mr. Reeves. This would be a significant undertaking, requiring several months to complete and substantial resources to execute properly. But given the concerns that have been raised, I believe we have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that our practices align with our stated mission. He looked around the table. All those in favor of commissioning the audit, please raise your hand. 9 hands went up. A substantial majority of the 14-member board. All those opposed. 3 hands, including Christine's. 2 abstentions noted. Harrison recorded the vote in the official minutes. The motion carries. We will engage an independent auditing firm to conduct a comprehensive review of the Foundation's operations, finances, and program outcomes. The Executive Committee will oversee the selection process and ensure appropriate scope and methodology. He turned to Christine. Ms. Palmer, I want to be clear that this audit is not an accusation of wrongdoing. It is an opportunity to demonstrate that your strategic decisions have been sound, and that this organization remains committed to its core mission. I expect your full cooperation with the auditing team. Christine's face was carefully composed, but her eyes burned with barely suppressed fury. Of course, Mr. Harrison, I welcome the opportunity to demonstrate that my leadership has positioned this foundation for sustainable long-term impact. The audit will vindicate every decision I have made. The meeting adjourned shortly afterward. Board members filed out with the subdued energy of people who had witnessed something significant and were not entirely sure how to process it. Several stopped to shake Keanu's hand or express appreciation for his willingness to engage directly with governance matters. Christine gathered her materials and left without speaking to anyone. Dorothy, who had been waiting in an adjacent room as Keanu had arranged, emerged after most people had departed. It worked, she said quietly. They actually voted for the audit, the first step. Keanu replied. Now comes the hard part, waiting, watching, ensuring that the process unfolds properly without interference. And Christine, she will resist. She will argue her case. She may attempt to undermine the audit or discredit its findings before they are even released. Keanu paused. But the wheels are turning now. The truth will emerge eventually. And when it does, we will be ready. The independent audit took 14 weeks to complete. The firm selected by the board's executive committee was a nationally recognized nonprofit consulting group with extensive experience evaluating charitable organizations. They brought a team of 7 specialists who examined every aspect of the foundation's operations: financial records, program outcomes, governance practices, staff interviews, family testimonials, industry comparisons. They worked methodically and thoroughly, following evidence wherever it led. Their final report, delivered to the board in late March, totaled 423 pages of detailed findings, analysis, and recommendations. The executive summary began with acknowledgement of the foundation's genuine strengths, dedicated staff, meaningful programs, a legitimate mission that addressed real community needs. The auditors found no evidence of fraud, embezzlement, or criminal misconduct, but they documented serious concerns about strategic decision-making and resource allocation. The report confirmed that Christine's marketing investments had generated increased donations, approximately 19% growth over 3 years. However, the cost of acquiring those donations was significantly higher than industry benchmarks. For every dollar raised through the new initiatives, approximately 61 cents was consumed by fundraising and administrative expenses, compared to an industry average of roughly 29 cents for established organizations. More troubling, the report documented substantial human impact from the shift in priorities. The auditors identified 63 families over 3 years who had been denied assistance under policies that would have approved their applications previously. They calculated that the foundation could have helped approximately 40 additional families annually if marketing spending had remained at historical levels. They documented specific cases where children had experienced worse outcomes because families could not access the support they needed. The report's recommendations were extensive and specific. First, immediate restructuring of the budget to restore program spending to at least 68% of total expenditures within 18 months. Second, implementation of new governance procedures requiring board approval for any reallocation of resources exceeding 3% of the total budget. Third, establishment of a family advisory committee to provide direct input on program priorities and eligibility criteria. Fourth, creation of transparent reporting mechanisms allowing donors and the public to understand exactly how contributed funds were being used. Fifth, and most controversially, leadership changes to restore stakeholder confidence and demonstrate commitment to mission primacy. The board met in executive session for 6 hours to discuss the findings and determine appropriate action. The final decision was reached by a vote of 11-3. Christine Palmer would not be terminated outright, but she would be removed from the executive director position and offered a restructured role focused exclusively on communications and external relations. Her salary would be reduced by 35%. She would be required to complete a certified nonprofit management program within 8 months, and she would be placed under direct board supervision for a minimum of 18 months, with quarterly performance reviews and specific metrics related to mission alignment. If she declined the restructured role, her employment would be terminated with standard severance. A national search would be conducted for a new executive director, with the position description emphasizing commitment to direct service, transparent resource allocation, and genuine rather than performative compassion. Board Chair Harrison delivered the decision to Christine in a private meeting with 2 other board members present as witnesses. "This is not punishment for criminal conduct," he explained carefully. "The audit found no evidence of fraud or embezzlement. Your financial practices were compliant with legal requirements. Then why am I being demoted?" Christine's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Because there is a difference between legal compliance and mission alignment. You prioritized organizational growth over immediate impact. You redirected resources from families who needed help now toward marketing initiatives designed to generate returns later. Those decisions may have been strategically defensible, but they were not consistent with the foundation's core values. I was trying to save this foundation. I was trying to ensure it would exist 50 years from now instead of fading into irrelevance. Perhaps. But in the process, you lost sight of why it needed to exist in the first place." Harrison paused. "You have genuine skills, Christine. Your ability to build visibility and engage donors is valuable. In the right role, with appropriate boundaries, those skills can serve the foundation well. But that role is not leading the entire organization. And if I refuse the reassignment, then your employment will be terminated, and you will receive 90 days severance. The choice is yours." Christine was silent for a very long time. "I need time to consider," she finally said. "You have until Friday. We need your decision before the board meeting where we will announce the organizational changes." Christine left the room without another word. For 3 days, she did not respond. Then, on Friday morning, she requested a private meeting with Keanu Reeves. They met at a small coffee shop in a quiet neighborhood far from downtown Los Angeles. Christine arrived first, looking different than Keanu had seen her before. No designer suit, no perfect hair, no polished makeup. She wore simple clothes and carried herself with the deflated posture of someone whose armor had been stripped away. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I was curious what you wanted to say." Christine took a deep breath. "I wanted you to understand why I made the decisions I made. Not as an excuse. The audit was right that families were harmed. But maybe as explanation. Maybe to help you see that I was not simply selfish or cruel. I am listening. I grew up poor. Really poor. My father worked 2 jobs and still could not keep the electricity on. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families while we lived in a 2-room apartment that smelled like mold. I wore secondhand clothes to school and got bullied for it. I went hungry more nights than I want to remember. Christine's voice cracked slightly. I swore to myself that I would never be invisible again. Never be someone that people could ignore or dismiss or walk past without noticing. I would build something that mattered. I would make something of myself that nobody could take away. So you pursued success, visibility, recognition. I pursued survival. In my world, invisible people got crushed. They got exploited. They got forgotten. The only way to be safe was to be seen, to be important, to matter enough that people had to pay attention. And when you came to the foundation, I saw an organization that was doing good work but was invisible. An organization that would fade into irrelevance while flashier competitors captured all the attention and resources. I genuinely believed that if I did not modernize our approach, there would be nothing left to help anyone within a generation. But the families who needed help now. Christine's eyes filled with tears. I told myself they were acceptable losses. I told myself the long-term gains would justify the short-term sacrifices. I told myself I was being strategic and sophisticated while the old guard was being sentimental and naive. She paused. I was wrong. I know that now. But in the moment, I genuinely believed I was saving the foundation by transforming it. Keanu studied her face for a long moment. He saw genuine remorse. He saw shame. He saw someone confronting the gap between her intentions and her impact for perhaps the first time. The question is what happens next. I do not know. The board offered me a reduced role, but I do not know if I can accept it. Working under supervision. Having my decisions reviewed and second-guessed. It feels like humiliation after everything I tried to build. Or it could be education. Christine looked up sharply. What do you mean? You have skills. Real skills. The ability to build visibility and engage donors is valuable. But you deployed those skills in service of the wrong priorities. You confused means with ends. You forgot that the marketing was supposed to serve the mission, not replace it. Keanu leaned forward. If you accept the restructured role, you will have the opportunity to learn from people who understand what you missed, to develop new capabilities that complement your existing strengths, to become a different kind of leader than you were before. You think I can change. I think change is possible for anyone who genuinely wants it. The question is whether you want to become better or whether you just want to avoid consequences. Christine was silent for a long time, staring into her coffee cup as if it contained answers she could not find anywhere else. I have spent my whole life trying to prove I mattered, she finally said. Maybe it is time to start proving it through different means. That sounds like a beginning. Will you be watching? To make sure I actually follow through, I will be watching regardless. But I prefer to watch people succeed rather than fail. Christine nodded slowly. Then I will accept the restructured role. I will complete the training. I will submit to the supervision and the quarterly reviews. And I will try to become someone that this foundation can actually be proud of. That is all anyone can ask. They finished their coffee in silence. Two people from very different worlds finding unexpected common ground in the possibility of transformation. 6 months later, the Sunrise Children's Foundation held a press conference to announce the results of its comprehensive restructuring. The new executive director was a woman named Patricia Henderson, a veteran nonprofit leader with 22 years of experience in pediatric social work and charitable administration. She spoke passionately about returning the foundation to its original mission: direct service to families, transparent financial practices, genuine compassion rather than performative charity. Program spending had been restored to 69% of the total budget, exceeding the audit's recommendations. The number of families receiving assistance had increased to 378 annually, compared to 273 at the lowest point under previous policies. A family advisory committee had been established, giving parents and patients direct input into foundation priorities. And Dorothy Mitchell had been appointed to a newly created position as Volunteer Services Director, with a salary that recognized 3 decades of dedicated service. She would oversee recruitment, training, and coordination for all volunteer programs, ensuring that the foundation's culture of genuine compassion was transmitted to new generations of caregivers. Christine Palmer was present at the press conference, standing near the back of the room in a support role that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. She had completed her required training. She had fulfilled every condition of her restructured position. And she had, to the surprise of many who knew her before, genuinely embraced the Foundation's renewed focus on mission. Keanu Reeves was also present, though he stood at the very edge of the crowd, wearing his familiar disguise of faded clothes and worn baseball cap. He had declined all requests to participate publicly in the announcement, preferring to remain the anonymous supporter he had always been. After the formal program concluded, he found Dorothy in a quiet corner of the room. "You did this," she said. "All of it? The investigation, the audit, the restructuring. None of it would have happened without you. I provided resources and attention. You provided courage and documentation. The board provided governance and accountability. It took all of us working together. But you could have walked away. You could have simply stopped your donations and let the foundation continue on its trajectory. Why did you get involved directly?" Keanu was silent for a moment, considering his answer. Because the children deserved better. Because the families deserved better. Because Dorothy Mitchell, who has spent 30 years serving others without recognition or reward, deserved to have someone stand beside her when she needed support. He paused. And because I have learned that the privilege of resources comes with the responsibility of attention. It is not enough to write checks and assume everything is fine. Real philanthropy requires engagement. It requires accountability. It requires showing up when things go wrong, not just celebrating when things go right. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas would have liked you. He always said that the measure of a person is not what they do when everyone is watching, but what they do when they think no one will ever know. Your Thomas was a wise man. He was the best man I ever knew, and losing him taught me that love does not end when someone dies. It transforms. It becomes service. It becomes the capacity to care for others because someone cared for you first." She reached out and took Keanu's hand. "Thank you, not just for what you did for this foundation. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. That someone would fight for what is right even when it was complicated and difficult and would have been so much easier to ignore." Keanu squeezed her weathered hand gently. "Thank you for 30 years of showing up. For every story you read. For every hand you held. For every family you comforted during the worst moments of their lives. That is the real work of charity, Dorothy. Everything else is just administration." They stood together in comfortable silence as the crowd gradually dispersed around them. Two people from different generations and different circumstances, united by shared understanding of what it meant to serve others without expecting recognition or reward. Outside the building, Los Angeles continued its endless motion. Traffic hummed. People hurried past on their way to appointments and obligations, and the countless small dramas of ordinary life. But somewhere in that city, a 7-year-old boy named Michael was preparing to go home after nearly 2 years of treatment. His leukemia was in remission. His hair was growing back. His eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and curiosity that had captivated Dorothy from their first meeting. He did not know about the board meetings and audits and organizational restructuring. He did not know about the anonymous donor who had intervened to protect the Foundation's mission. He did not know about the power struggles and policy debates that had determined whether families like his would receive help or be turned away. He only knew that a kind woman with silver hair had read him stories about brave knights throughout the hardest year of his young life. He knew that the Foundation had helped his parents keep their home and their sanity during impossible circumstances. He knew that people he would never meet had cared enough about his survival to contribute resources and time and attention to an organization dedicated to helping children like him. That was enough. That was everything. And somewhere in the quiet corner of the Foundation's headquarters, Keanu Reeves slipped out a side door and walked to his modest car parked in a visitor space. He drove away without fanfare, without recognition, without expecting anyone to notice his departure. There were other causes to support, other injustices to address, other opportunities to transform grief into service and resources into impact. The work was never finished. The need was never fully met. The world kept generating new suffering that required new response. But that was okay, because the point was never to solve all problems forever. The point was to show up, To care, to give without expecting recognition, to help without requiring gratitude. That was what Dorothy had taught him through 30 years of quiet service. That was what sick children deserved from the adults who claimed to care about them. That was what real charity looked like. Not galas, not metrics, not visibility initiatives, just love, just presence, just one person choosing to make another person's impossible burden slightly more bearable. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was the story worth telling. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you!